It's a tiny bug that can lead to a lifetime of pain and debilitating illnesses. July is by far the worst month of the year for Lyme disease from a tick bite.
You can have permanent neurological, nerve damage. You can even have cardiac, heart damage.
More than 30,000 new cases of Lyme disease are reported every year, but experts believe that that's a fraction of the real number.
Tonight, Eyewitness News reporter Greg Suskin breaks down the big questions we still have about the disease and the health problems you may not even know can come from a tick.
We instantly cringe at the sight of them, but ticks are an ugly fact of life that for some gets much uglier.
I felt like I was going crazy.
Laura Bebber of Rock Hill never saw the tick that bit her. Then the intense shooting pain started.
My arm, and then through like my chest and up my neck and into my head.
She went to the emergency room more than once, afraid she was having a heart attack. Each visit gave no answers.
They look at me and they're like, "You're fine." They would do tests, and I felt really crazy.
She started doing research on her own, panicking because the migraines and extreme fatigue shut down her active life. Her own family doctor finally suggested a test for Lyme disease. It was positive. Ticks are found from the woods to urban yards. Kids can pick them up on a playground. You can encounter them on a walking path. I yanked this one off my head while watching TV, and we've pulled several from Dixon, our yellow lab. Yet the Centers for Disease Control is finding most Lyme disease where you might not expect it. This map shows most cases are up north and in the Midwest. In fact, Lyme disease is named for a tiny town in Connecticut where it was first identified. One of the reasons experts say there may be more problems with Lyme disease up in the New England states is because of the intense heat here in the South forces ticks to remain low to the ground under protection of leaf cover. North Carolina health officials reported 323 confirmed cases from 2006 to 2016. South Carolina reported 259, but that's only cases with a positive test result. The CDC says the roughly 30,000 reported every year is so low, adding a zero would be a more likely total. How bad can this be for people?
If you don't catch it in the early stages and it gets to the later stages, the oral antibiotics aren't going to work.
At Piedmont Medical Center, infectious disease specialist Eleanor Rames has admitted Lyme disease victims to the critical care unit.
You can have permanent neurological, nerve damage. You can even have cardiac, heart damage.
She says it's misdiagnosed because it mimics other conditions like fibromyalgia, arthritis, and autoimmune illnesses. It was 5 months before Bebber was tested for it.
And I think a lot of doctors are honest in saying, we just don't know.
If antibiotics fail, there's little that can be done. Almost 3 years down the road, Bebber's pain is still with her. She tries not to be overcome by it.
I don't want this to totally freeze my life and stop me from living.
Greg Suskin, Channel 9 Eyewitness News.
Lyme disease sometimes starts with a bullseye rash, but not always. If you find a tick on you and you then develop headaches, muscle pain, or fatigue, get tested for Lyme disease, and also get tested again in a few weeks because a lot of times it will show up as negative at first. We posted the ways you can remove ticks as well as some preventative techniques at our website. Scroll over news and click 9 Investigates. It's all in Greg's report.
This illness is a lot more widespread than most people know or most people notice because it's very underdiagnosed. It's very rare that somebody will actually get diagnosed with Lyme disease, so it's labeled as a rare disease. And it is, while it's not common, it's not as rare as we think. It's just not diagnosed, so it's missed a lot of the time.
You talked to me over the phone about the fact that it can mimic many things.
Yes, so Lyme disease is known as the great imitator because it looks like a lot of different diseases because the symptoms they vary and they move from different organ systems, so it's not just one thing. With how we understand disease, usually you have a disease and a symptom that goes with that disease. Lyme disease doesn't behave like that. Because it gets into the cells of the body, it can have symptoms in all different areas. So it looks like different things at different times.
List some of those things that it can look like.
One of the most common symptoms is fatigue. Which is, really easy to miss because, everybody's tired from time to time. But fatigue with Lyme disease is very chronic. It's very persistent. It doesn't matter how much you sleep. You just can't seem to get your energy up. So that's one of the hallmarks. The biggest symptom, though, it would be joint and nerve pain and issues. So there are a lot of people with nerve pain or joint pain that it just doesn't seem to respond to pain medications. So they're in pain long term and they don't know why. And that's usually if it's a nerve pain type thing. So if it comes with like tingling or weakness or one thing that people usually say, sometimes it feels like little electrical pulses on your nerves. That's something that is a hallmark of Lyme disease as well.
Tell me some of the other illnesses that we know with Sorry. Okay. Tell me some of the other illnesses with names that people might be diagnosed as, but they actually have Lyme disease.
One of the most common ones that people get diagnosed with is fibromyalgia. So fibromyalgia is described as just painful areas, wandering pains all over your body that, it just doesn't, there's no reason for it. So people get diagnosed with that a lot. The treatments for fibromyalgia usually include medications that block the nerves. And so because the Lyme disease tends to attack the nerves, it can look like fibromyalgia a lot. So that's one of the things that people will often get diagnosed, or chronic fatigue. So they'll get diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, which really doesn't mean anything except they're tired a lot. And so there's not really a lot they can do with that diagnosis. So they get labeled as that, and they kind of go through life with this diagnosis, but they really never solve the problem because that's not really what it is.
Okay. We were talking with Patrice about the time when she was bitten by a tick, and she said she took maybe up to 5 days before she went to see the doctor. Is it true that if someone's bitten by a tick and they go much sooner to get treatment that they could prevent long-term Lyme disease?
Yes, because the bacteria, it takes a while for the bacteria to reproduce and spread throughout the body. So the sooner you have exposure or any, if you are bitten, definitely go to the doctor and get on antibiotics right away. The longer you wait, the more likely it is that that bacteria will get inside your cells. Once it's inside of your cells and it's out of your bloodstream, then antibiotics don't work as well because antibiotics, they're in your bloodstream. So the longer you wait after you get bitten, the more likely it will be that you'll have chronic Lyme disease.
So what time frame should we say?
As soon as possible. As soon as you notice a tick bite or a rash. A lot of people don't actually even remember getting bitten by a tick. So they'll have maybe a little itchy area on their neck or their back or their leg, and it's just a little rash. And they don't think a lot of it because a lot of times the symptoms don't set in right away. So you just, I have this little rash, and you don't pay attention to it. By the time you start getting symptoms, you forgot about the rash because it had been a few days, and the rash at some point will just kind of go away. The typical Lyme disease rash is a bullseye kind of rash, so it usually spreads out in a circle with it's clear in the center, and then the rash is kind of in a circular pattern. So if you see anything like that, I would get it checked out right away. The sooner the better, like immediately.
And some people may not even know that they've been bitten at all.
Yeah, they don't know, and especially if it's in an awkward place like on your back, like where you won't necessarily see it. You may feel a little itchy, but sometimes you don't feel anything. So if you're out in the woods, or if you go camping, if you have pets, you're more likely to be exposed to ticks. And if you really need to take special precaution when you're outdoors, and especially when you have pets.
Precautions like what?
Wear clothing that will cover your arms and legs, so cover your limbs. Really try to do insect repellents if you're going to be outside, especially if you're sleeping outdoors and you're camping. This time of year, people go camping a lot. So if you or your kids are out, it's really good to make sure you're wearing protective clothing and then do repellents.
Okay. Talk to me about the test or the diagnosis of Lyme disease.
Okay, so the typical blood test that we do will pick up Lyme disease in its early stages. So it will pick up the bacteria. You know, if you've just been bitten, just been exposed, your immune system starts making antibodies against it, and that's in the bloodstream. If the longer you wait, the less likely it is that that test will pick up Lyme disease. So if you've been bitten and it's been, you know, a week or 2 or a month, then chances are that test may come back negative. So what we generally like doing is a DNA test, where we're actually testing for the DNA of the bacteria as opposed to testing for the antibodies. The DNA test is very delicate, and there are only a few labs in the country that run this test. I use a lab out in California, and it actually will test for a long-term exposure as opposed to immediate exposure, because again, most people don't get tested immediately because it's just not something that we think about.
You said that this test might not be something that many physicians would pursue, and that it may not be covered by insurance.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Because Lyme disease is so rare, a lot of doctors don't test for it, and the DNA test isn't covered by most insurance panels, again, because it's a very expensive test. It costs a few $100s, and again, it's very unlikely that someone is going to test for Lyme disease based on our traditional knowledge, because most of the people who get the basic blood tests come back negative.